Haley, I'm really upset by the fact that there are still Blockbusters around.
I was unaware that there were still Blockbusters around.
I thought that they didn't exist anymore. Like, I thought that the reason that there were still memes existing about Blockbusters was that they didn't exist anymore.
Right? Like, did you see that thing where this person got carded one time, but then they saw the Blockbuster tag on their keyring and they were like, never mind.
Yeah, you're definitely old enough to be chill.
Yeah.
Like, you're definitely a real human that exists. Not an alien, definitely just a human that's around.
Yeah, so, like, I'm confused about sort of why we're talking about this, because Blockbusters are gone.
No. In the place where I am definitely pet sitting right now, there is a real Blockbuster that is open and is selling commerce things. Like, there are videos to rent. I'm sure that means that there is also popcorn and ring pops still.
I have questions. Have you gone inside of this Blockbuster?
No, because I'm scared that it's like a I don't know, a portal to a time dimension or something.
That's a valid concern. Like, a genuinely valid concern.
Yeah, that it's just like a front to something else.
So, okay. Like, are they... How much do they charge for, like... are they still buying... What... I have just so many questions. Mm-hmm. Yeah. First of all, what can you rent at this Blockbusters?
And I think the bigger question for me is, like, why are Blockbusters still around and not, like, Borders?
That's a really great question.
Because I had to buy Afterlife on Amazon in the digital form, and that's messed up. But there's still a Blockbuster around, and there's, like, rented copies of like, VHS? Because you...
See, that's my confusion. Is, like, do they have VHS or is it DVDs at this point?
I don't know. Because they couldn't possibly be doing Blu-rays, right?
I don't know.
Also, do you think that we should, like, intro who we are for this podcast? Because we're recording right now.
Oh, well, I sort of just thought we were talking about Blockbusters.
No. I started the podcast, by the way.
Well, hi.
Hi, yeah.
Not you. The microphone and the people that are on the other side of the microphone. Allie.
Okay. Well, I thought you were, like, genuinely excited to be here for me. Oh, okay.
No.
Well.
Good morning, people on the other side of the microphone.
Listen, all right, so I thought that we talked about this last time, that you can't give a time of day. Puts me under a lot of pressure.
Dude, okay, but the thing is, the people, I guess, don't know this, but, like, it's always ironic. It's always been evening when we're recording.
All right. Well, welcome to Chapters and Chill.
Welcome to Chaps and Chili, people.
Welcome to Chaps and Chili. My name is Allie.
And I'm Haley.
And this is your new digital book club.
Indeed.
And we're actually talking about a book this time.
That's true. We're, like, actually doing the thing. Instead of just talking about what we're going to be talking about, we're actually talking about today.
Correct, yeah. I am aggressively sober.
And I am, like, passively not sober. I've had, like, a glass of wine.
Right.
And I will continue to drink this. I say glass, but it's a mug, honestly. But I will continue to be drinking this mug of Chardonnay throughout the podcast situation.
What's that mug looking like there, Haley? What's on that mug?
So it looks like there's two animals sleeping on a bed, and they are taking up the vast majority of this bed. And this poor cartoon lady is, like, in the corner. Which is pretty apt because we are currently pet sitting, or you're currently pet sitting, whatever.
Right. Yeah.
And I went to go pick a mug, and literally every single mug option was just, like, different animal mugs.
Yeah, I feel that.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I feel that a lot.
Yeah. But I'm sorry, can we go back to Blockbusters? I know that we moved forward, but, like, I'm not done. So, like, when I worked at Office Max, we used to tell people to go to Radio Shack, and they would be like, Radio Shack doesn't exist anymore.
No, it does not.
Exactly. But there was one Radio Shack because somebody, like, bought the building and, like, the right to keep it named Radio Shack. So maybe that's what happened with Blockbuster. Maybe, like, one person was like, nah, man, this could still be a profitable venture. How?
What I like to think, if it's something like that, is it's really a space for people to talk about, like, sex ed. Like, it's really like a Planned Parenthood, but the name of it is Blockbuster.
Yeah, dude, what if it's, like, a front for a drug ring or something?
Okay, so you took that in a different direction. I was thinking that it's, like, Block and Buster with, like, sexual protection.
All I'm saying, dude, is when I lived up in Nopo, there was a store in our, like, neighborhood that only sold lampshades. And it was a huge store. Like, that only sold lampshades. And I'm pretty sure I've never seen one single person go in or leave that store. So we were all pretty sure it was a front for drugs.
I love that.
So I'm pretty sure that's what this Blockbusters is also. Because, like, who needs a store full of lampshades? And who really needs a Blockbuster anymore?
So I will give a little bit of context to this. It is right next to a Taco Bell.
That almost doesn't change anything for me.
Okay.
I mean, like, I guess we're in Oregon, so weed is legalized. So, like, I guess someone could get, like, really stoned and go to Taco Bell and then forget that it's 2016 and rent a movie at Blockbuster.
Yeah, that's true.
Anyways.
Okay, yeah. We'll probably follow up on this later on, to be fair.
Infinitely. But thus far, so we have started reading Afterlife by Shelbi Wescott.
True.
And that's, like, sort of where we are at in this book club.
Yes, that's true.
So I am probably about 6 or 7 chapters into Afterlife currently, which means that, like, I'm not quite a fourth of the way through, because, of course, I did the math, and a fourth of the way would have been 12 chapters. So I'm not quite to a fourth of the way. So, you know, you can tell I haven't been absolutely absorbed by this book yet, but it is pretty good thus far.
Right, yeah. And I think one of the things that I want to address, too, is, like, the spoilers component of this as well. Because I know that the reading pace that we will have will not always be the reading pace that, like, each other and then anybody else that's listening will have as well. And, I mean, I personally don't care about spoilers myself. And I think that that's kind of going to be the method that we're going to have as well, just because there isn't really a way to avoid it.
Exactly. We sort of chatted a little bit about talking about themes and stuff in general and book ideas in general, but, you know, I like to be able to talk about the book that we're actually reading. So I don't think I'm going to be too concerned about spoilers. That being said, if anyone is listening along that wants to, like, read with us, and you, for a specific book or whatever, and you don't want us to spoil, just let us know. We're completely capable of, like, altering sort of, I guess, what it is that we're doing for the sake of your listeners. I don't know. What am I trying to say here, Allie?
I mean, I think that the important thing to know is that, like, you're going to have to realize that in the 4 books, in the 4, I guess, podcasts, we're going to be talking about the book in all sorts of facets of it. So I guess recognize that going into that, I mean, it's not going to be separated chronologically. So we're going to be kind of jumping around and know that going into it. And if you don't want to be spoiled, the best way to do that would just be to read the book beforehand, or just recognize that spoilers may or may not happen for you.
Exactly. So if you're super concerned and, like, super excited about a book, if we read a book that you're like, yo, just let us know and we'll figure it out.
Right. Yeah. One of the things that I think is interesting in my reading thus far has just been one of the things that we touched on last podcast was knowing Wescott's voice beforehand.
Yeah.
And getting to know her literary voice.
Exactly. So what I've found in my reading thus far is that, like, honestly, I would not recommend reading a book written by somebody who is an authority figure in your life or was an authority figure in your life. Because, like, I have so much more heavy criticism for, like, the literary devices and the way that Wescott writes than almost any other author. I find myself writing, this is sloppy writing, in my notes so much more with Wescott than anyone else. And I think it's because she was at one point, like, I never had her as an English teacher, but she was an English teacher for us, our grade, our friends, etc. So, you know, I can just imagine myself writing essays for her and her being like, oh, well, you didn't point out this, or like, oh, well, you're wrong about this. So it makes me criticize her way, way more than I think is honestly deserved. And it was a real struggle in the first few chapters, but honestly, moving forward into, like, chapters 4, 5, 6, etc., she's actually held up pretty well to my super heavy criticism.
I think it's almost been the opposite for me, and I think that for us that kind of is indicative of how we show, like, affection for people too, because I've almost been willing to kind of forgive those kinds of flops for people, because I'm like, Well, that's just how writing is. Like, that's just how the writing process is. It's like, you want to get those ideas down. Sometimes during the writing process, those things kind of happen. Or because I know her writing process and just who she is, what her personality is like, I'm just, like, willing to forgive those things more easily than I would be for somebody that I don't know.
That's
And
fair.
so I think it's almost the exact opposite, which I think is interesting.
Yeah. It's super interesting to have, like, this objective, I put this in air quotes because it's not objective in any way.
Yeah.
This objective view on, like, Wescott's professional abilities.
I agree.
Because, you know, again, she was a teacher, she was an authority figure, and now we get to, like, I don't know, decide whether that was deserved or not.
I feel like I would have a similar opinion if you were reading a book by one of my favorite authors as well. Even though I wouldn't consider Wescott one of my favorite authors. I've read her books, but I would consider her one of my favorite people. I don't know that I would necessarily consider her one of my favorite authors yet, but I do feel, I don't know, I feel like a sense of protectiveness around her works.
See, and I get that because I feel that way about my favorite books and authors as well. Like, when somebody points out these, like, oh, well, this is sloppy writing, this is, like, a poorly developed plot point. When it's my favorite things, I'm always like, yeah, well, you don't understand because it doesn't really matter that.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't have that for Wescott because, again, she was such an authority figure in, not to me, but in my situation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it would be interesting to kind of have someone else read the works that you are passionate about and see how you respond to criticism to those books, even if it's not like negative criticism, but just like overall responses to those.
Exactly, because like I said, I mean, Wescott, for the first few chapters, I was like, meh, but now has been holding up to this heavy criticism very, very well. So it's not like it's inherently negative, it just is. It's just a very interesting point to, like, look at.
I agree.
Okay, so we decided for today's, like, body topic, so to speak, like, what we're going to actually be talking about is, like, some of the literary devices, or more so some of the themes that have come up in this book that we've read thus far. So, Allie, I think the first one we decided we wanted to talk about was the concept of, like, identity.
Absolutely.
And, like, I don't know what I was going to say.
I think that identity is an important one, especially in these first few chapters, because it's establishing this family. And Mara's family is an interesting one because at the first outset, it looks like a cookie-cutter nuclear family. And then once you delve into those first two chapters, you immediately start to see the cracks within that family.
Yeah.
And I think that it's crucial within a YA novel to establish those senses of identity and start to see how the main character is kind of grappling with identity.
Yeah, so for those of you who either haven't been reading along or whatever, basically what's going down is there's this 4-year-old boy in this family who feels like he remembers, or is telling his family that he remembers a past life where his name was Cole, which is not his name now, where he had this whole different situation. He had different siblings, different parents, etc. And I feel like, you know, there's this point where he sort of throws this temper tantrum and he gets mad at his mom for calling him Soren, which is what his mother has named him. And he tells her that he wants to be called Cole, right? And I feel like it's a really interesting situation, a really interesting thing to think about in terms of, like, as a parent, at what point is it your job to, like, indulge your children's identity whims? And, like, at what point is it your moral obligation to, like, treat whims either seriously or to negate them? Like, where is that line? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. Because I think that especially during those years, it's a very formative time. And I went by a lot of different names and variations of my name. And I think that my parents also did a lot of that for me, and that was considered natural and normal because those were considered, like, attached to my name. And also I think that it's very commonplace for young children to give themselves identities, like especially when they're playing with toys of like, I am a firefighter today. I am an astronaut today, and I want to be considered that today. So those are considered commonplace identities to be attached to. But this is an example where how as a parent do you respond to this? Because this is not the considered of like, oh, I have a imaginary friend kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's an interesting response of like, how do you handle this as a parent? There isn't a manual for this.
Yeah, exactly. So like, is it your moral obligation to sort of, your child is 4, right? And they decide they want to be called by a different name.
Sure.
Probably, more often than not, that's just a thing they're doing right now, and they're going to move on and be fine with their identity that you sort of have in mind for them later. So is it your obligation to treat that as a genuine desire of theirs today? Or can you sort of brush past it knowing, air quotes, knowing that it's going to be a phase? Just like if your kid was going to tell you he's a firefighter or a dragon. Like, can you brush off the fact that he wants to be called Cole the same way you can that he wants to be a dragon? And more so in like the grand scheme of things, what if your daughter wanted to be called Cole? What if your 4-year-old daughter decided that they were a boy? Is it your responsibility to take that seriously, knowing that it could be a serious issue moving forward? Or can you brush it off because they're 4 and it's a whim,
Yeah. And I think that it's a hard balance too, because in those situations, the balance is so hard. And in Soren's case specifically, because the fact that he says that he's recalling memories of like a different family, there's also that component of the invalidation as a parent too, of like, there's another family, and also, especially within the context of our society now, how do you not feel the threat of like, was my child like kidnapped or something too, of like, because I know that later on in I think actually it was in those first few chapters, it's mentioned that he goes to a Montessori school that's in someone's home. And so there's also that threat of like, what's happening to my child during those times too. Yeah. So it's like a safety kind of component too.
Dude, okay, so like, I know we didn't actually decide to talk about the Montessori school situation, but like on a side note, it's really interesting because the main character says like, she offhandedly is upset with her parental for taking Soren to a Montessori-themed school in someone's garage, basically, right? Yeah. And it's really interesting because, like, Montessori-themed in this situation has such a negative connotation.
It does.
When Montessori is the most amazing. Like, I went to Montessori preschool, and it was phenomenal. Yeah. But without proper, like, actual Montessori-ness, whatever that could mean, I understand how it could be a negative connotation because Montessori is really about like individual identity, is really about like you aren't good at math, fine, then let's do art for the entire day. Like Montessori is so about your individual skills, your individual passions. Right. So it's interesting to see that framed in such a negative way when I feel like that's so much a part of why I turned out so like academically gifted is because they allowed me the freedom as a youth,
I wonder if that negative connotation comes with the fact that the setting is in a small town rather than the setting being in like a more metropolitan area.
I don't know though, because so I went to 2 years of Montessori preschool, and the first year I went to Montessori preschool was actually in La Grande, Oregon, which I don't know if nobody here probably knows where that is, but it's itsy bitsy,
Yeah, it's probably similar to where this is going to be based in.
Honestly, I agree. This is based in a fictional small town called Ivy Falls, but La Grande, Oregon is in eastern Oregon, and it's pretty dang small, and like, that's where I went to Montessori school at, so I don't know.
Yeah, because I mean, this is based in Ivy Falls, which is an hour from Bend. So
I thought it was an hour outside of Portland.
No.
Okay.
Because later on, it's an hour from Bend.
Sweet. Okay.
So it's sort of in that area. But yeah, that's an interesting concept that I hadn't really thought about, and I'd kind of forgotten that it was Montessori based until we just thought about this as well.
Me too, frankly.
But yeah, the moral obligation, I guess, like parenting in general is kind of brought up, and I think that we'll touch on that later. It's just there's a lot of dilemmas that I don't really know how I would solve unless I was thrown into them, which I think is kind of the purpose of this. And I think why kind of Wescott puts these situations into the story as well.
Absolutely. So yeah, it's really interesting. I know that you had a lot of feelings about like crafting your identity and like how your identity evolves sort of through watching your peers and your authority figures.
Yeah. I think that it's something that's brought up, especially in those first few chapters. And I think that it has to do a lot with adolescence, especially because of the fact that when you are growing and crafting your identity, you do observe the people that you are around and you kind of watch them under a microscope because of the fact that you're learning to be who you are, right? So the people that you are closest with, whether it be your guardians, whether it be your teachers, your coaches, you're watching them and observing their behaviors and mannerisms to try to see whether those are things that you want to pick up and respond to and kind of use when you are becoming an adult. And I think that she touches on this a little bit in the text because of the fact that she says that being a teenager is like watching everyone that you love through a magnifying glass that amplifies faults. And it's hard to embrace loving your parents when all you see is in them is everything that you don't want to become. And so it's interesting to see adolescence in this way because I relate to it in that sense, especially within high school, because it's so many folks who don't know who they are yet and are just trying to scramble for ideas of what they want to be.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's really interesting because you, in that whole little spiel you just gave, you mentioned a lot about like choosing who you want to be as an adolescent. And I feel like that's not accurate. I feel like adolescence is a lot about being upset with who you're inevitably going to be. Like,
interesting.
Watching your parents and sort of having this denial, like, I'm not going to be anything like them, but recognizing in your soul that you are. You know what I mean? Like, you're inevitably going to be like your parent. You're inevitably, even if you do different things, you're still going to be like them. And, your being doesn't really change, I feel like, moving forward in life from adolescence on to adulthood. So your soul knows who you're going to be, even if you don't respect it yet,
What do you classify adolescence as far as age?
I would say adolescence is 6th grade to 20.
Okay. So you even see like 6th graders like having that denial?
Yeah, because what I think of when I think of adolescence is like the introspective, like, ughness, just teen angst, like
sure.
hashtag angst is how I view adolescence,
Yeah.
So like, at 6th grade, I feel like I recognized who my mom was. I saw that she had flaws and I didn't want to be like them.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I also knew that I was going to be like them,
Okay.
But then again, maybe that's a skill that my mom had. She, talked to me a lot about how she didn't want to be her mom growing up. And also you end up just like your mom.
Right, exactly. Okay. Yeah, no, that's an interesting thing. I think there's definitely a lot of like denial that goes into it because I think that that's a very crucial component of it. I guess that I also just believe in having the observational choice, like the seeing, like having the reason that we have those role models and stuff is because we're trying to like mimic those things.
Yeah, interesting. So you don't think anything is like inherently set by the time that you become an adolescent?
I do think that is definitely a component of it. I just think that like when we're...
Wait, so I'm sorry, you do or do not think something is inherently set in your being?
Oh, in your being?
Like
I mean, I think that like by 6th grade there's definitely like components of your identity that are set, like just by like being in like social environments, for sure. But I think that like the reason that we say certain things and like test out new phrases and stuff to like teachers and stuff is because we're trying to test certain boundaries in safe environments to see what is allowed and what works.
Yeah. So like sort of branching off of this, we weren't going to talk about this, but I sort of want to bring it up. So personally, I know a human being right now who's like 13, 14, who's going through the identity situation, trying to figure out who they are.
Yeah.
So like if they decide that they are something right now, is that valid? Do you know what I mean? Like, should you treat I guess this comes back to identity, but like, should you treat every decision an adolescent makes as a valid representation of who they are, even though it might not be going forward? Does the fact that it might change make it any less valid right now?
I think that it's still valid. Like, I think that if someone identifies as like a jock this year, right? And then next school year, they're like, no, I'm a punk this year. Then those are still choices that they're committing to, and it should still be honored because it's still something that they're making a choice for. And whether or not, they feel safe enough to commit to the clothing or, the hairstyle or those things like that, that's, up to safety and comfortability within like that social group. I think that it's still a choice that they're making, and that should be honored within that because they need that validation to continue feeling safe enough to make more choices.
So, like, Allie, if you had a 13-year-old daughter right now, and they decided they were... I know.
I am a 13-year-old daughter.
True. And same. And sorry for every single part of this. But, like, if you had a 13-year-old daughter, and they decided that they identified as, like, a punk or whatever. I don't know what the cool kids are calling it nowadays.
Yeah.
But they wanted to shave their head, right?
Yeah.
Would you allow them to, or would you know that moving forward, if next year they wanted to be a girly girl, that would hinder them? Like, how would you sort of approach that, I suppose?
I think that I would recommend a bald cap first to see how they like it. Because I think trying it on, there's nothing hindering them from trying on the identity first.
Okay.
Because that allows them to, like, see how they look, see how it feels, and temporarily, like, try on the identity. Yeah. Because that still is making a choice, and it's not committing it in a way that is gonna give them the feeling of regretting it instantly and hurt them.
Yeah.
So it's the same way as, like, if girly girl for them meant long wig. So going and trying that on and seeing how that felt, or whatever girly girl meant for them if it was an external accessory.
Yeah.
So trying that on before making a full commitment.
I feel like that goes a lot into what we want to sort of talk about, like, next-ish, validation. Like, it's so, so, so important for people to be validated. And I feel like the absolute most, like, important thing is that you're given so much freedom when someone hears you. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, not just listens to you, but actively hears you and hears that you want to be this. And even just, like, there's a part in the book, bringing it all back to the book for a moment. There's a part in the book where Myra, the main character,
Mara,
the narrator, is having the struggle where she thinks she's crazy and she thinks she's alone because of the things her little brother is telling her, right?
Right.
And her best friend sort of gives her this amazing freedom by saying, like, well, what are you going to do about this?
Right.
And making it seem like she has the freedom to do whatever she wants to do. And I feel like that freedom to, like, just be listened to is absolutely invaluable. Like, it's the most amazing thing because all of a sudden she goes from thinking she has no options to considering all of her options. And I feel like that's sort of the same thing is once you feel like you're being heard, the freedom window just bursts wide open. You know, you can do whatever you want.
Absolutely. And I think that that's a crucial component throughout the whole story is that feeling of validation. Because I think that's what Soren is desperately looking for is to not feel invalidated throughout his experiences. Mara's desperately seeking to not feel alone in what she is experiencing. And later, when we learn a little bit more about what Carly is experiencing throughout her softball career and her other experiences, she wants to feel validated. And I think that that's primarily just an adolescent experience. Like that's, I mean, it's
Do you though?
No, and that's what I'm saying is it's a human experience. But at the height of adolescence, I think that's when you need to be most validated, because it's important for the rest of your life because I think that as you continue into adulthood, that's when you need to be giving back to others.
Yeah, that's fair. Like validating other people as either you were validated as a youth or you were not, and providing other people the opportunity to sort of like grow and develop in ways that you, again, were not able to.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that also kind of leads into the other theme that we wanted to touch on, which was the hopelessness and alone bit too.
So, like, in this whole, like, you know, all of this novel that I've read thus far, 6 whole chapters, but, like, whatever.
6 whole pages.
6 whole pages, same. There's, like, Wescott creates this undeniable truth that, like, Mara is alone. And I feel like that is such an adolescent view on life. And I'm not saying it's adolescent in that, like, only adolescents can feel it. It's adolescence in that, like, it's this naive view of the world. Like, there's such a real part of your soul that thinks you are so alone in life, but in reality, like, you almost never are. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah, and there's this idea, I don't know, I think that it's, again, also a primarily emphasized in adolescence that you are meant to feel almost kind of like hopeless and alone. I don't know that it's necessarily just a, like, our society, like a current thing. I don't know if it's necessarily that, because I really only know what's going on now, but it almost feels that way, that, like, it's been almost romanticized that way, to, like,
the, like, aloneness of
adolescence, that, like, it's, I don't know, maybe it just feels that way from, like, the literature that we're meant to read and stuff.
Fair. There's also this quote in the book that says, like, I'm not going to bring up the entire quote right now, but it says something about containing your thoughts into one soundbite in a crowded hallway. And, like, the idea of feeling alone in a crowded hallway is so teenage.
Oh my God.
Also so human. Like,
yeah.
I don't know. I feel like we've all felt that way, especially going forward into the day and age of social media. Yeah. It's like, you know, I have 3,000 followers on this thing, but I'm so alone in this crowded hallway.
Right. No, I agree. Shout out to the dogs that I'm sitting right now.
Indeed. The idea that other people won't understand that you are singularly the only person in the universe feeling this way is just, I wish I could say it was so teenager, but really it's just so human, you know? Agree. Like, even, I mean, I have gone to therapy so many times, and every time I'm like, I can't express what's in my real thoughts because everyone will think I'm nuts, when in reality that's not the situation at all. 9 times out of 10 people are like, yeah, that's a super common thing for people to feel in your situation, like imposter syndrome, like, you know, all of these things that you feel singular in are so common.
Yeah, no, I understand that. So there was one of Wescott's quotes that I want to get your take on, and it was that you hold on to, so, okay, I'll just read the whole thing because it makes more sense in context. So it was, you take love with you when you leave. You hold on to those pieces of you that loved and were loved, and whether or not you remember is not important. You are made of love, even if we are born into hurt. What do you make of those last 2 sentences?
The last 2 sentences. We are made of love, even when we are born into hurt. I honestly don't have very many feelings about the last 2 sentences. I feel like it's way more important to talk. Sorry, I just got really excited about this. This quote really resonates with me, but I feel like it's more the first part that resonates with me. Like you take love with you when you leave, you hold on to those pieces, blah, blah, blah. So, like, I had a boyfriend who killed himself once. Yeah. And, like, first of all, the most important thing I learned through that whole experience was that love does not fix anything. Like, love doesn't solve your problems. Love does not always win. Love doesn't solve a dang thing.
Please.
But the idea that you take love with you when you leave is the most, like, romantic idea in the world to me.
Sure.
Because, like, I just hope that's true so much. I hope that, like, when you die, all the love that you've had in your life and all the people that you love, that you just get to, like, I don't know. I don't even know how to fully express this, but, like, you get to fully realize that. Your soul gets to, like, be aware of all the love that you had and all the love that you gave, you know?
I hope so, too. That would be a really nice That's a really nice way of interpreting the afterlife.
And, like, I have always been of the belief that, like, the purpose of life, air quotes, pretentious as fuck. Oh, sorry. Pretentious. Whatever. Pretentious
We have an explicit tag for a reason.
Yeah, buddy. So, like, the purpose of life is love. Like, there is nothing more that we are here to do than love and be loved and, like, indulge in what is love, you know? So I feel like that is a real thing. Like, we are made of love in the sense that life is made of love.
Yeah.
Life is wholly and completely about love, you know?
I agree. No, I think that that's really important. And I think that understanding that viewpoint makes going through life a lot more valuable. And understanding that earlier also makes life a lot more valuable too.
Yeah, and, like, so I tried to express this to the boyfriend who killed himself. I tried to, like, tell him one day that, like, that is what I think the point of life is like, love. And that didn't really seem to comfort him at all. Which, I mean, going forward, I understand why.
Yeah, sure.
You know, but, like, it didn't really seem to comfort him at all. And again, I think that brings back to the point that, like, while love is the purpose of life, love doesn't fix anything. You know, love is the end-all be-all in every way, except that it won't make you feel better, you know?
Right.
Like, love is good, love is not perfect.
Yes. I think that that's a really important message to give to as many people as possible. There was one more theme that you wanted to touch on, too. Was that the tense one?
Yeah, so, like, throughout this novel, I feel like the tenses that Wescott, like, the author, actively uses is super-duper interesting because we are actively hearing this story in past tense. And I don't know, I sort of want to know what you think that does for the emotion. Like, if we were talking about this in Wescott's English class,
yes,
what do you think she would say about what emotion that creates and what is the purpose? Because, like, she says in the very beginning, like, first few pages, quote, I know my name comes up in stories around campfires, unquote. And she's actively referencing this whole story, this whole tragedy she's about to go through, this whole horror novel we're about to read.
Yeah.
So she's self-aware and telling us about it through this third situation, you know, through this other time, through this other place.
Right.
And then even later in the story, she says, quote, I remember her posing the question as if she were thinking out loud, how do you know about the things that happen after you die, unquote. So once again, even later in the novel, she's telling us that she's trying to convey that she is speaking to us through this not here situation. So, like, I don't know, I guess I just wonder, it's situated in such a way that she's telling us she's remembering from a later time, a later situation. What do you think that purpose was? Do you think it was intentional?
I do think it was intentional. For me, I get very hooked into stories that when I do get hooked, I focus less on the tense. When it comes to reading pieces academically, I do focus more on tense. I think when I focus on poems, I focus more on tense as well. But when I'm reading stories, I do think I focus less on tense. So for me, when I think of horror, I do always associate it with past tense because I do think of those like campfire tales. I think of like passing them through history. And so for me, it wasn't out of context for it to be in past tense. And I think, if anything, it would have been almost unrealistic for it to be like inactive.
Yeah. I think it's super interesting because, first of all, when I was in middle school, I deemed myself a writer, you know. And, you know, I wrote all those super emo stories, and the struggle was always, like, telling it in the present tense. Like,
that's always what they wanted you to do, yeah.
Exactly. So, I agree with you. I think horror, in and of itself, is told through a campfire situation, is told in past tense. Like,
usually.
This happened. And I feel like that was a very intentional choice. But also, I feel like...
Usually YA is written in a present mode.
Totally.
So I think that's kind of an interesting twist.
I feel like it was also super intentional given the fact that we're talking about the life situation and the death situation and, like, the the in-between space between, because we know Soren has this idea that he was living and then he died and then he existed in this other space and then he was reborn.
Right.
I feel like that's another reason that she chose to make it so that Mara was telling us this story.
I feel like every time that you want to say her name, you try to say Merlin.
No, I try to say Moira, and it's because I've recently started watching American Horror Story Season 1 again, and, like, Nanny's name is Moira.
Fair.
But anyways, so, like, I feel like she's telling it from this, like, after death situation, this after post story, post death, you know?
Interesting. Okay.
So I feel like that's another reason that Wescott specifically chose this tense, is because it is so post story, post death, post blah. I
like that.
It's in reference to this random third space that exists.
Right. No, I like that. That's an interesting. I hadn't thought about the in between context.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like this is the kind of story she tells us if we're all dead together, sitting waiting to be judged in heaven. Like, she's like, yo, you won't even believe what I just went through, though.
No, I agree. I also feel like this would have been a story that she would have flipped around to tell us to scare the crap out of us. Like, you wouldn't believe, like, I knew a cousin who.
Yeah, true. Like, I knew, like, the stereotypical campfire story where it's like, no, I know this is real because it happened to my second cousin's boyfriend who told me. Sweet. So, Allie, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm almost done with this next glass of wine. And by glass, of course, I still mean mug.
Perfect.
So I'm a little drunk.
Love it.
Yeah, so I'm sort of done talking about themes and stuff because, like, ugh.
I love it. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, like, moving forward.
Great.
Did you want to talk about, like, the potential November ideas, or do you want to save that for, like, a later podcast?
No, let's dive in.
Okay, sweet. So, dear people on the other side of the microphone.
Please.
I have a class.
I'm on the other side of the microphone.
That's true. You are literally on the other side of the microphone right now.
Tell me.
Great. So I have a class where I have to talk about feminist stuff.
That sounds like a bore, Haley.
It's not a bore. It's pretty much the opposite of a bore in every way.
That sounds like something I definitely would not have majored in.
Yeah, not at all. Which I definitely didn't talk about in the first essay I had to write for this class. Sweet. So we have to do this, like, personal project moving forward. And I was thinking about November, maybe making this podcast part of our personal project.
I think that's a great idea.
I think so too. And, like, reading something that I could then talk about not only with the podcast peeps, but also with my professor.
I love it.
So I was thinking maybe if you and all the people listening agree, I was thinking maybe we could read some feminist propaganda for November.
Please. I always want to do that.
Great. My initial thought is to read the book Lean In, because it's sort of like, I don't know, I've heard John Green talk about it. I've heard a lot of, like, you know, white male feminists talk about this book in terms of feminism. So it seems like a pretty accessible feminist book.
Rosianna loves that book.
Exactly. So, like, it seems like a really good idea. And also, I haven't read it, which is ridiculous because I read a ridiculous amount of feminist propaganda.
I managed to major in women's studies and have not read that book.
Yeah.
So I'm a poser.
So, exactly. So I'm thinking that maybe for November we'll read Lean In.
I would like that a lot, actually.
Yeah, sweet. Because, like, feminism, but also projects that I can get credit for.
I love it, actually.
Unfortunately, that means moving forward, I will get to be drunk in November, but I can't probably be drunk in November because, like, wait, did I say I could be drunk in November?
I mean, you can be drunk in November, but you probably can't be drunk while we're podcasting.
Exactly, because assignments and college and stuff.
Yes.
So, October, drunkenness. November, not drunkenness.
But
Sick.
December, we can actually do a series.
What
Yes.
up? So we have to decide what series we're going to do in December. If you guys have any ideas for series you want us to drunkenly talk about, you want me to drunkenly talk about, let us know.
And you can let us know on our social media, which is, as we mentioned before on our previous podcast, the Twitter that we have is @chaptersandchill.
It's not at Chapters and Chill. It's at Chapters N Chill, like M&M's. Is M&M's with just an N? Mm-mm. Okay, never mind. Then not like that at all. It's Chapters
N.
Letter N Chill.
Yeah.
Like, we were too lazy to spell out and, but it's really because Twitter wouldn't let us spell out
There was
and.
a character limit, so...
Rude.
Yeah.
So chapters and chill.
Yes.
And then our Tumblr is chaptersandchill.tumblr.com.
Yep. Where we posted some of the information about Afterlife as well. So, and we'll be continuing to do that.
Exactly. And we will post all the podcasts there, and we will post all the fan ideas that we have about books that we read, etc.
Fans. Oh my God.
Not like our fans, but like the book fans.
Exactly.
Allie.
Yeah. And we did end up creating a Slack where all of the listeners and us can be chatting about this book as well. It is chaptersandchill.slack.com. I prefer it as the best way for communicating just because you don't need to have a Facebook to log in, which is dope. And I like that a lot.
Exactly.
Yep.
We also have an email address where you can like send us emails about things, just like funny things you see that you want us to see, or like actual ideas about this podcast.
Exactly.
Which is allieandhaleyread@gmail.com. And like, is that just an email address or a defensive statement about how we live our lives? I don't know. Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. We don't even know.
allieandhaleyread@gmail.com, because yeah, we read. Duh.
Obviously. And as we mentioned last time, we will be setting up a Patreon for the podcast hosting site costs that will eventually be coming up in the next few episodes, I'm sure.
Yup.
Yeah.
So where you can listen to us is obviously this SoundCloud situation that we've got going on. Is also the iTunes situation that I have wonderfully figured out.
I'm so thankful.
Now I know what the hell an RSS feed is.
Shout out.
I don't really know what that is, but at least now I've convinced iTunes that I know what that is.
God bless.
And moving forward, we are going to be putting this podcast on Podbean because a friend mentioned it. And I'm sorry, Kate, darling, it is not up yet, but hopefully by this weekend, / maybe even the time this podcast is even uploaded. I don't know.
Maybe.
It'll be set up by then, but not right now. I'm sorry.
Hopefully soon, though. Yeah. And Haley still is not going to tell you where to find her social media, but you can just find it by going on Twitter, to be honest, because our Twitter knows all. And, I mean, that's the easiest way to find all of our social media. It's just literally like 2 clicks away, to be honest.
That's literally so true. But I am actually this time going to break tradition and say that you can find me at Haley_Brie on Twitter, and that's HAYLIE_BRE. HAYLIE because I don't know. My sister didn't know how to spell Haley, I think. I don't know why that's my name, but there we are.
Yeah, and I'm at 23 of me. I don't do genetic testing, I'm sorry.
Yes, 23 of me is yours.
Yeah. I don't do numbers, and I don't do genetic testing, I'm sorry. And, Haley, do you want to close this out?
Yeah, so, like, once again, this time pretty much more appropriate because I'm also a little bit drunk. Pre-drunk. I feel God in this Chili's tonight. And I accept this Dundee on behalf of everybody. So, like, good night.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Bye.